Hi, I'm Greg. I've been a home brewer for almost 10 years now, and today I just wanted to quickly take you through the process that I go through when I develop my own brewing recipes. Obviously, when you start off, you're probably using kits, whether it's extract kits or maybe ambitious and you start out with the all-grain kits, but essentially you're brewing somebody else's recipe first. When you start getting into thinking about developing your own recipes, I found one of the most helpful things is to make something that's similar to a commercially available beer. So my first suggestion is get a book like this, Clone Brews, that has commercial beer recipes in it. That way you can brew your own and then you can taste it side by side with something that you're already familiar with. Once you get through that, you might start to think about where those recipes came from. Another great recipe book and some information on it is Brewing Classic Styles. So this goes into kind of the origins of where the beer started and gives you some good recipes for making your own classic styles. Then, once you get through that, you might start thinking about what are people doing now? Well, there's a book for that too, called Modern Homebrew Recipes. And this goes through some of the more modern techniques, newer hops, and newer just ideas on making beers. When I decide that I want to make my own recipe, I'm really not just making it from scratch. I'm using those 3 books that I just showed you, and it could be a recipe just because there's a certain style that I want to try that's not really readily available in stores. It could be just I really like a beer and I want to make something of my own that's similar to that. So what I end up doing is I open up these 3 books, I find the style that I want to make. Usually there are a couple different recipes for each kind of style that are similar to what I want. And then when I'm figuring out which grains to use, which hops and yeast, a lot of it has to do with stuff I already have in stock or ingredients that I know that I like better than others. And really what I'm trying to do is develop a recipe that makes sense for me on my own system. So when I see things in a recipe book that says, something like 3/4 of an ounce of hops, I might adjust that because you're buying hops in 1 ounce bags. Maybe I'll use the whole ounce so I don't just have a 1/4 ounce sitting around that I may never get around to using again. And the same kind of thing applies with the malted grains. If it's 12 3/4 pounds, I'm probably going to go to 13 pounds. Like I said, because I'm not trying to make an exact copy of the recipes here, I'm kind of blending what I see and just out of convenience, I'm making a recipe that's going to be easy for me. So now that I've gone through and looked at the recipes in the books, I've probably looked at some online resources too, and I've given myself an idea of what ingredients I want to use and kind of the proportions. What I do then is I use Brew Target to develop the recipes. It's an open source piece of software. I'm really into the open source stuff. I also use GIMP for photo editing. I use LibreOffice. So there are plenty of other recipe development apps and pieces of software out there, so just find whichever one you like best. So when I start putting this into Brew Target, I can get an idea of what kind of gravities I should expect, what the alcohol percentage is going to be, the color of the beer, how bitter it's going to be as far as what hop additions you're doing. So you can still just write it down if you want to, but at least in modern times, these brewing software apps really are helpful in figuring out what your end result is going to be. Something else I highly recommend is taking notes about your recipe development, about brew day, about fermentation, how it tastes in the end. I use a spreadsheet in Google Sheets. This way I can make notes about all that stuff. Because a lot of what I do is I'll make a recipe. If I like it, I'll probably modify it a little bit for the next time. And having those notes to go back to really helps me figure out how to make the recipe better in the future. And now it's time for a shameless plug. A few years ago, I recruited my mother, who is a retired software engineer, to help me develop an app for Brew Day, available on the iPhone and the iPad. And really what it does is it sends you notifications about when it's time to add whichever ingredients you need to throughout the boiling stage. We recently talked about upgrades to include a mash timer and a whirlpool timer. For now, it's just for the boil, but this is something that I've used every brew day since we had our first test version available, and it's something you might want to look into to help you out. Alright, thank you for watching this video. Hopefully some of what you saw here gives you ideas to help when you develop your next recipe, and cheers! Oh, and by the way, I should say, when I say cheers, when I do this beer stuff, I drink tea, not beer. Speaking from experience, when you drink beer and you do this stuff, you're bound to make a mistake. So, cheers.